Oh, hi, Wendy. Thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it because your book is absolutely riveting and so important because we never ever hear this perspective from a Old Bailey judge. So thank you so much, Wendy, for being here, first of all.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you so much. And so before I begin, I've got to obviously do the introductions, which is, you know, until March 2022, Her Honor, Wendy Joseph KC, was a judge at the Old Bailey sitting on criminal cases trying mainly allegations of murder and other homicide. She read English and law at Cambridge, was called to the bar by Grayson by, I think, in 1975, and became a QC in 1998 and sat as a full-time judge from 2007 to 2022. When she moved to the Old Bailey in 2012, she was the only woman amongst 16 judges and only the third woman ever to hold a permanent position there. She was also a diversity and community relations judge, working to promote understanding between the judiciary and many different sectors of our community, particularly those less privileged and minority groups. She mentors young people from a variety of backgrounds who hope for a career in law and has a special interest in helping women. So, Unlawful Killings is her first book for the public, which is fantastic. So, obviously, so what made you write this book? Was it during the pandemic?
Yeah.
And sort of what made you ask the question why people kill?
Um, so for a long time, as well as the day job in court, I'd been doing the diversity work outside court. And that involved lots of stuff like having groups of school children in to talk to them. When the pandemic came along and I was sent away for 4 or 5 months and told not to trouble them, they really weren't sitting. I couldn't do any of the in-court work, and that was just the fact of life. But it was really troubling me that I couldn't do any of the diversity work. So it occurred to me that I might just be able to write a little something. And I was really, Saswati, I was really thinking of a pamphlet. The book begins with an introduction of a school visit after court hours. And that's what I wrote first of all, intending that it would be like a pamphlet that could be sent out to schools. I knew someone who was a literary agent who looked at it and said, as they do, could you write a bit more? Could you write about a case? So I did. And she said, could you write about another case? So I did. And the next thing I knew, I had half a book. But I really wrote it intending that it would be something very small and useful to those who would otherwise have been visiting me at the Old Bailey.
That is fascinating because you can really see the passion of the young people coming to the court when we write about it, and especially that one young chap who was very much going to join the legal system, as you can clearly see, and very inspiring. I think being in that environment because I think not many school children get to have that opportunity to be in the court like the Old Bailey. So that was really fascinating to read that even happened. But I was wondering because yeah, the cases were hard to deal with, and so how did it affect you? I'm like, was it must have been really hard to sort of deal with it day to day. Like how did it affect you?
Um, well, the first thing to say is, of course, each of the cases that I describe in the book. So, there's one about knife crime, one about gang crime, one about mental illness, one about domestic violence and sexual abuse. Each one of them isn't a specific case that happened. What I did was to identify an area I thought was important to people. And then I went back and looked at all the cases I'd done on that sort of subject. And then I drew interesting things from them and created the story because I took the view it just wasn't fair or right to expose actual people's misery in a book. So the stories are, each story is not real in the sense you couldn't go and find that case, but everything in each story is true. in the sense I have seen every single one of those things happen somewhere. So, to answer your question about what it's like, it's difficult, but people think that judges are lawyers. Well, they are lawyers, of course they are, and you have to know a bit of law. But most of all, you just have to know where to go and look up the law. The real job of a judge in a criminal court is really what you might call man management. It's really the job is to make sure that everyone involved in the case is fairly dealt with and gets the fairest possible trial. And so what you're really doing is constantly monitoring the situation, because if you've got a witness who's a 34-year-old man with no problems, he can walk in, get into the witness box, give his evidence, not difficult. If you've got a battered wife giving evidence, or if you've got a 9-year-old child giving evidence, it's very different. And the way that a judge needs to react to that is very different to ensure that that witness has the same fair crack of the whip, the same fair chance to get an account across and have it accepted by the jury. So what you're really doing is dealing with people all the time. And it is difficult. No one said it was easy, but it's so interesting. I mean, it must be one of the most interesting jobs in the world and a huge privilege to be able to do it.
That is just amazing, and it's true. And I agree with that. It is one of the most privileged jobs. There are people saving people's lives essentially in this role, and it's so interesting because you get the whole sort of array of human behavior and emotion within a court. And so, how do you think that greed, for example, is causing issues within society?
Greed. I suppose people have always been greedy. There's always been crime related to people trying to get money in different ways. But people are greedy for slightly different things now. So they are greedy for fame and acknowledgement now. They are greedy for a position now. And the combination of people being greedy for a place to go, to be seen, to be recognized, and greedy for money is quite a dangerous one. And it's probably, I can't be sure, but it's probably one of the reasons that have led to so much gang crime. So that youngsters who aren't getting recognition in one more traditional aspect of their lives, maybe at home, maybe at school, get very tempted to join gangs where suddenly they've got respect, if you want that sort of respect, but many of them do. The carrying of knives is really the gaining of a position in the eyes of other people. So when you say greed, I think there's always been greed, but I think we need to be very mindful about what people are greedy for these days.
That's really true, actually. It has changed considerably, hasn't it? We didn't have social media and things like that just in the last 15 years, it's really been around. So it makes total sense that suddenly the attention, the acknowledgement, is much more sort of commonplace now, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it really affects, I think, mental health generally, of young people, especially when you've got this kind of constant pressure. So what do you think is the solution around sort of getting more mental health services for people before they get to that stage of like being in court in Old Bailey?
Yeah, I mean, the simple fact is whether it's mental ill health or whatever the problem is, by the time it gets to the Old Bailey, by the time it gets to any court, it's way too late to put it right. At the Old Bailey, the likelihood is by the time a defendant gets through the door of the Old Bailey court, he or she is going to be in the dock, with the risk of serving very, very long sentences. And somewhere else, there'll be a dead child on a mortuary slab. So it's way too late to put it right. No judge can put that right. They can make sure the trial's fair, but they can't undead someone. So you really do need, as you are saying, to go way back. And mental ill health, as with physical ill health, as with all the other problems, which lead unhappy families, problems at school, all the things that lead young people through the doors of the court. They all need to be tackled, and they're all what you might call treasury driven. They're all about money. They're all, all these things, I'm not saying they could be mended, but they could all be made a lot better with money. It's just a question of how government ultimately spends limited resources. But forgive me if I just sort of go on a little bit, just to say this. When I see young kids, when I see kids of 5 and 6 and 7, they have a very strong sense of morality. And it's a very simple sense of morality. They don't like being hurt. They get that being hurt is wrong, and they get that hurting other people is wrong. Somewhere between being 5 and 15, something changes. So we really need to be in the schools. We really need to be there and talking to people. Because when you bring a school group into the courtroom and show them what's happened, they are responsible, sensible in the way they approach it. But out on the streets, they may not be.
It is so strange. I was actually going to ask you, which is exactly do you think exposing children to the legal system at a young age will help them, like steer them for future generations, do you think?
I think knowledge is a good thing. I think almost all knowledge is a good thing. And I would like children, as I would like everyone, to understand the system, which is really, why I wrote the book, because the courts are a service industry. That's what they are. They're there for society, for people. And it's amazing how people don't understand how the system works. And here's an example. We expect groups of 12 people who don't know each other, come from completely different backgrounds, with all sorts of different experiences and abilities, to sit down together and discuss things. Now, my experience is they are amazingly good at it, and that it's really moving to see how dedicated they are, certainly in serious cases, to getting it right. But most of them will never have had the experience of sitting around a table with 11 other people discussing an issue. And that may mean that there are some people who find it difficult to find their voice to express their view. It may mean there are some people who find it difficult to shut up and let other people do the talking. I don't understand why we don't teach children in schools to sit down in small groups and discuss issues, to learn to listen, to learn to express a view, to learn that there's nothing wrong with adjusting your view if it suddenly occurs to you that maybe you missed something. I don't know why we don't teach children that.
No, I totally agree because it's gotten a lot worse. Again, with social media, you get a lot of sort of bandwagoning, and you get a very binary sort of
Yeah.
system of thinking, which is really dangerous. And so, and I was thinking exactly, when it comes to sort of diverse thought as well, and just generally diverse thought, diversity, how do we get more sort of diversity even into the legal system?
Well, it's quite hard for me to talk about the legal system as a whole because I only really know about the criminal law. And I suppose the first thing to say is in in basic terms, the most important issue in a criminal court is guilty or not guilty. And if there's a trial, the person who makes the decision isn't the judge. The person who makes the decision, guilty or not guilty, is the jury. And certainly at the Old Bailey, juries were amazingly diverse. So that's a good thing. Um, when I first came to the bar, so I'm very old, and I came to the bar in 1975, there were comparatively few women. It's very different now. Over the years, there has been an increase in diversity, diverse backgrounds, diverse ethnicities, but nowhere near enough. We are seeing much more diversity amongst barristers and solicitors in the criminal courts, but we're not seeing enough. We're not seeing enough at the top end. And the result of that is we are not seeing even remotely enough on the bench. So when I went to the Old Bailey, there were 16 full-time judges. And as you said, there were 15 men and me. But it wasn't just 15 men, it was 15 men over the age of 60, all white, all middle class or upper middle class, all with similar backgrounds. By the time I left the Old Bailey, almost exactly 10 years later, of the 14 full-time judges, 7 were women. So a huge difference and a big difference in backgrounds and experiences. But on the ethnicity front, we have just not been making the progress we absolutely should have been.
That's really interesting. I've got friends who are sort of who've just joined the bar and they are diverse backgrounds. So it's really interesting to see their journey through that. And there was really something you mentioned, which is that you said there were diverse juries. But the thing is that with juries, obviously, I think there was a time you mentioned that you didn't necessarily agree with the jury decision. So is there ways that, juries are fully ready to make critical decisions? Because is there an issue that juries like bring with them human bias? And so how do you get critically thinking juries in the system? Because there are times where you're like, what kind of decision is this? So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the first thing to say is almost everyone who works in the criminal courts thinks the jury system is the best system. Now, when you think that it's slow, it's cumbersome, and it's very expensive, there must be some big upsides to make people who see it happening say it's a good system. Um, and the upside really is that you've got the people whom it is there to represent. That is society. That's what the law is there for. It's not to protect individuals. It's not like civil law is there to put right an imbalance if someone's lost money or someone's been hurt. You try and compensate and sort it out between two people. The prosecutions in a criminal court are brought in the name of, I nearly said the Queen, of course it's the King now, brought in the name of the King on behalf of the public. And the people who reach the decision are the public that the law is there to protect. It is true that there are times when a judge thinks, I wouldn't have made that decision. But that doesn't mean that the jury is wrong and the judge is right. Judges may be really good on the law, but there's no reason why they're any better on the facts than anybody else. And one mind sitting on a bench trying to weigh up all the evidence could easily miss something. 12 minds watching the same evidence and discussing it might see something or think of something that a judge doesn't. Maybe someone is giving evidence and are behaving in a certain way that makes the judge say, well, that looks to me as if that person isn't telling the truth. Someone on the jury might be able to say, if you put me in the witness box and I had all those people looking at me, I'd be stuttering as well. I'd be flushing as well. I would lose my train of thought as well. So it doesn't mean because a judge might have done something different on the facts that the judge is right. The judge's job is to make sure that the jury understands the law, which is an art in itself, and then to make sure that they are reminded of all the relevant facts. And then it's over to the jury to work out what they conclude happened.
That is just, it's fascinating. It exactly, it is an art. There's just so much to it. There is just so much also just procedural kind of things that have stayed within history that is still with us, which is amazing. And we were talking about sort of these issues, especially with young people. And do you think, knife crime has obviously increased a lot? And so how do we go about reducing it? What do you think would be a good solution or a starting point to, so that we can nip it in the bud, essentially?
If there was one easy answer, you wouldn't be asking me the question because we'd have found the answer by now. The problem is there isn't one problem. There's a lot of different problems all happening at the same time. Unlike guns, knives are very easy to get hold of. Everyone has got in their home a knife. And you can kill someone with, you can kill someone with a potato peeler if you really want to. So you don't need a fancy knife to do it. If you're going to stop knife crime, I guess you've really got to stand back and work out all the different things to making knife crime happen. And yes, of course, there are the occasional really bad people who want to hurt. But actually, that's not what leads to most killings with knives. So if you're not carrying a knife, you can't stab someone. So why do kids carry knives? Well, lots of kids carry knives because it is very easy to get hold of something that's an interesting, attractive object. It's on the internet, it's easy to buy hunting knives, which are shiny and which are stamped out and molded and curved. And it probably doesn't occur to the 15-year-old who buys one that actually the reason it's stamped out and has holes in it is so that when you've driven the knife into it, the animal it was designed to kill, you can pull it out more easily. The suction is reduced. But they are holding a very lethal weapon. And if you have bought one of those because you want status, because you want to show it off, you're not going to walk around with it in your pocket. It's going to be down the leg of your trousers somewhere where you can pull it out and show people. Once you've got a knife in your hand, it's so easy for something to happen. Then you get another group of kids who carry knives because they're frightened of the first lot who are carrying knives. because they're worried about walking around the neighborhood unarmed. You get all sorts of reasons why youngsters carry knives. Sometimes because they want to join a gang. Why do they want to join a gang? Because maybe they're really unhappy at home, or maybe they're being bullied at school, or maybe things are going wrong. No help is available. I don't excuse them. Please don't think I'm trying to excuse what they're doing. But it might be sensible if we tried to understand and analyze the 4 or 5 basic reasons why people carry knives, rather than just saying, let's punish them when they do. Because we don't, of course, we want to punish them when we do, but so much better if we could stop them doing it. So much better if we could get those kids in school to say, you know what? Carrying knives is bad.
Yeah, it's like a tornado, isn't it? It just destroys everything around, the families that have just been destroyed by it. It's just horrific. Like I remember reading the case that you've written about, and just this utter devastation of like everyone who was involved, all the families involved. It's just awful. And that's fascinating. And I had no idea that the literacy level had such a sort of close correlation actually with
Yeah.
that. And so I'd be interested to hear if any kind of organizations you'd be willing to share with us to try and also get involved, because I know I work with like Penn, with English Penn, which is obviously very famous for writing to prisoners and things
Yeah.
like that. But, are there any other organizations you would recommend, do you think?
Um, there are lots. So there are more general ones, which support reading, but do have programs for those in prison. So there's a thing called Give a Book. More specifically, I have been working, certainly when I was at the Old Bailey, there's a thing called the Sheriffs and Recorders Fund, which tries to support prisoners and their families.
Wow.
And since I've retired, I'm specifically working with them on a project about reading. And we've started that project in a prison for younger offenders aged between, I think, 18 and 25 on the east side of London.
Wow.
We've launched a project which is part of the Sheriffs and Recorders Fund, and they are, as it were, helping work through it, as they do with so many different things. And it's really designed to assist at all levels of literacy and illiteracy in a prison called ISIS. And so the project is called ISIS, a reading prison. And it allows, so for example, when youngsters are taken in that first night, where if they can read, they may be very, very depressed and unhappy.
Yeah.
They get a little book explaining, this isn't the end of the world. Tomorrow is going to come. There will be solutions that will require your hard work and your remorse, but there are ways through this. Then there are those who can't read at all and who will need help with that. There are those who have some reading skills but want to be able to communicate with, for example, their siblings, younger siblings, or kids, or parents. And there are projects for writing little stories to be read to their children. There are those who will need to learn how to fill in forms for job applications. There are those who are already readers and really want to be able to access a way forward with their lives. So lots of different baskets of things that you can do. And that can be replicated right across the whole of the prison estate, I think. Anyway, we're giving it a go.
That is fantastic. I'm so excited to hear about that. I'm definitely going to check it out as well myself, because I'm always curious to learn and how to find out and helping awareness and also helping these important projects. So thank you so much for sharing that with us, Wendy. Really, such a privilege to be able to speak to you today. Huge thanks for joining me and talking about this amazing opportunity and this experience that you've had.
It's been lovely talking to you.